Hey, everybody. Good to see you. Good to be back. I just want to start by saying, if you are a single guy, you cannot come to If Gathering. I know how you think. What? I'm just here to serve. What's the big deal? For women only. For women only. And if you are a single female, if you're a mom, if you're a business professional and a mom, we just encourage you to be here. You don't want to miss February 8th and 9th, but it is for females and for women only. I was planning on Tuesday, Wednesday this week. I had this idea, or I'd had it for a long time. We were going to start a brand new series together today called The Art of Living. And as our staff and team were kind of going through some of the things and telling stories from last December, I just did something that I very rarely do, just decided to put a pause on that and start that series next week. So we're going to talk about the art of living and how the scriptures teach us the best way to live. We're going to kick that off next week. So we don't have church today. Just kidding, okay. I just wanted to take a few moments today to essentially just kind of have a family discussion, just kind of talk about some things, celebrate some things, look forward to 2019. So that's what we're going to do together. Does that sound good to everybody? You don't have a choice. It's kind of what it is. This is a stool that I have in my office, and I'm going to tell you why I'm telling you this in just a moment. But I have this stool in my office, and this is a custom piece. You cannot pick this up at Pier 1 Imports, okay? Some gentlemen in our church made this for me, and it represents the three different areas of ministry in our church. If you're on our staff, you work in one of these three areas. One of these legs says aesthetics, and that's a fancy word for design. One of these legs says shepherding. One of these legs, you can see that, says operations and aesthetics. There's a team of people here that work at this church, and they just do a great job. Everything from the street to the seat, everything you see, smell, feel, touch. I mean, they're just incredible at making this place look good. And their work is very, very important. In fact, we have people who come to this church every week, and they say, Jared, I did not believe a word that you said, but everything looked great. And their work is just, they're very, very talented. And I'm glad they're here because I don't know anything about aesthetics or design. They don't even invite me to these meetings, okay? They don't want me in these meetings, and there's a good reason for that. I'm not even on the aesthetics team in my family, okay, in terms of picking paint out. But they do an incredible job. Then we have our shepherding team. One of these legs. There we go. The shepherding team. And they essentially, our shepherding team, this is if you have kids in high school ministry or children's ministry, the discipleship process and making sure people, even what we do here on Sunday morning, helping people grow in their faith. There's a team of people that work in that area, really the heart and the soul of our church. And then we have our operations team. That's everything from finances to the building. And these are some of the wisest leaders I know. And they just make sure that the resources that you give get stewarded well, get placed into the right buckets. They work with things like Excel spreadsheets. They're very, very bright, some of the best leaders I know. And the reason I tell you this is because this sits in my office upstairs just as this constant reminder that everything we do as a church, every leg, nothing's more important than the other thing. The sermons aren't the most important thing. The songs aren't the most important thing. That only together, all these different pieces sort of work together to accomplish the mission that we feel like God has given us as a church, to invite every generation to experience the love and the grace of Jesus. As lives are made whole, as families are made strong, and as our community is made new. And if one of these legs goes out, becomes a very wobbly stool, and we all work together. Now, this is not in the Bible, just so you know that. There's not the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Stool that Jesus gave. This is just a model of ministry that we feel like God has sort of, given us to accomplish what we feel like is ultimate and what is the most important thing, which is our mission as a church to invite every generation. Now, the reason I tell you that, you're like, why do I care about what you do at staff meetings? Here's why I tell you that. Because for many of you in 2018, you showed up for the first time, you gave for the first time, you passed out bulletins for the first time, you flipped burgers for the first time at a student ministry event. And every piece of what you do in this church, every single person who spread mulch, every single person who showed up, gave to the ministry fund in 2018, you are a critical piece to accomplishing this mission. And I just wanted to take a moment together today to say thank you from the bottom of my heart and from the bottom of our staff's heart for what you do to help us accomplish our mission. Without you, we would be a very wonky stool. We would not work well. And so thank you for everything that you do and did in 2018. As we began to sit down at the beginning of this year and look through some of the numbers, you were more generous in 2018 than you've ever been. In terms of attendance, it's just been incredible to see. And as we look back over 2018, I know there's a tendency for some of us to think, well, in a church this size, I kind of show up and I gave some money or I served or I passed out bulletins. And it doesn't really make a difference if I'm there or not. You play a critical and a vital role, and you will continue to play a critical and vital role as we go into 2019 in accomplishing our mission of inviting every generation to experience Jesus. And I just wanted to say thank you for the role that you have played and that you will continue to play. And I just believe what we're going to do together in 2019 together is just incredible. As we look back at 2018, there's a sense of celebration. But as we look ahead to 2019, there's just this sense of expectation and this sense of anticipation that just involves all of us. And I think the mission of our church to invite every generation is more important and is more critical than it's ever been in the United States of America. For our church, for the church, I just think at this moment in time, the mission to invite every generation, the mission of the church, is just more important than it's ever been. And there's a reason for that. And some of you guys, you know this stuff. We talk about this every so often. The church, the mission of the church, has always been a countercultural mission. The message of Jesus has always been, no matter what culture or when it's shown up in a particular culture, it has always been a controversial message. The idea of gathering to sing songs to an invisible God has always been somewhat of a controversial and countercultural message. But in 2019, and you guys know this stuff, the Church of Jesus Christ faces some unique challenges in North America, in North County, San Diego, and it's the reason why the mission that we feel like God has given us is just so important. But you know that there are unique challenges that the church as a whole, not just our church, but the church faces. You feel this in conversations with friends. You feel this in conversations with family members where they say things like, well, I'm spiritual, but I'm not what? I'm not religious, which is kind of their way, and this is increasingly true, isn't it? At work and family, people just kind of going, keep your God thing, Jesus thing kind of away from me, all your, Jesus stuff. I don't want anything to do with it. And it for a long time in American culture, that was not the case. Christianity was kind of the dominant voice, kind of the dominant player. In fact, many of you, if you're here and you're in your 40s or 50s or 60s, you remember a time if you did not go to church, you kind of felt awkward for not going to church, didn't you? In fact, for some of us, you grew up, if you didn't go to church, you felt like you needed an explanation for why you did not go to church. That's not the case anymore, is it? In fact, for many of you, you feel kind of awkward telling people that you go to church. You feel kind of funny when coworkers or sometimes even family members ask you. You feel like you need an explanation for why you have decided to follow Jesus because something in our culture has changed. 20, 30 years ago, some of us, we remember this. It was unthinkable that a Little League soccer game would be on a Sunday morning. Some of us, you remember the time, a Little League baseball game. It was unthinkable that would be on a Sunday morning. But isn't it true for many of you, on your way to church today, you drove past fields that were filled with parents and kids in organized sports. It's just a new reality for the church as a whole. It used to be the church shaped public policy. The church shaped liquor laws. The church decided what was open and what was closed. Some of us, do you remember a time when everything was closed on Sunday? Anybody remember those days? You couldn't find anything. You wanted to, now it's Chick-fil-A is the only thing closed on Sunday. which consequently is the only day I ever want Chick-fil-A. I don't know. Brilliant marketing, really. But there's just something that has changed. The spiritual landscape of America has just shifted. It's just changed in the last 20 or 30 years. And this isn't to make anybody feel good or guilty, but even in church attendance, in terms of people who go to church regularly, something has changed. Used to be, some of you remember these days, you go to church every week. That was just what you did. Now the average person in America who considers themselves a church attendee goes 1 out of every 6 weeks, which some of you are going, I'm doing pretty good, man. I'm doing pretty good. When I first heard that, I thought, I was like, that's depressing, man. Then I realized I could preach this message next week and the next week and the next week, and it'd just be great. And in fact, some of you are really proud of yourself right now because you're here and you're not watching the Chargers game, okay? Some of you are here and you're watching the Chargers game anyway on your phone. Some of you don't know who the Chargers are. They're a sports team that used to be in San Diego. They have a quarterback named Phillip Rivers. Few Phillip Rivers fans, few Phillip Rivers jersey. Yeah? Okay, a few of you left. Okay, good. Do I have time to tell my Phillip Rivers story? Can I? You guys are like, I don't know. Whatever. Do whatever. It was a couple months ago. I was in this burger restaurant, and I was with Dane, my 6-year-old. And there was this guy eating a burger across the restaurant. And he was a tall guy. And I'd heard Phillip Rivers lives in San Diego still. And I heard he had like 50 kids or something. And I see him. He's got like a Charger shirt on and Nikes. And I thought, that's got to be Phillip Rivers. He was tall, sure. So I look at Dane, and my son Dane loves Phillip Rivers. He wears this Phillip Rivers jersey everywhere. And I said, Dane, you're not going to believe this. That's Phillip Rivers over there eating a burger. And Dane's like, no way. I said, you should go get his autograph. Oh. This has nothing to do with the sermon, by the way. So he walks over to this table, and I'm watching from afar, and I'm thinking he's going to get an autograph, and I'm kind of crossing my fingers, and I see Dane kind of talking to this guy, and the guy's kind of shaking his head, Dane walks back over, and he's like, Dad, that was not Phillip Rivers. I said, buddy, do you mean to tell me that Phillip Rivers just lied to you? Said he... Anyway, that's my Phillip Rivers story. But something in the... Where were we? Something in the fabric of America has just changed. If you've been to Europe, you know this is the case. Some of the most beautiful buildings that you will ever go to, and Europe went through this a long time before the United States, a post-World War II Europe, saw the rapid decline of the influence and the position of the church. And some of the most beautiful buildings that you'll ever step into were built in Europe to be churches. But the problem is, if you've been to Europe lately, they're not churches anymore, are they? They're bars, they're businesses. And if anything keeps me up at night, if anything wakes me up in the morning to come to this church and be a part of this church, I just don't want to see that happen in North County, San Diego. If anything wakes me up in the morning, if anything would break my heart, it's that one day your kids or one day my kids or your grandkids would walk into this building and they would say to each other, did you know this used to be a church? Did you know that my parents used to serve in this church, or my dad prayed and received Jesus in this church, and that one day it would be something else? The mission of the church that Jesus Christ launched 2,000 years ago on a hillside in Caesarea Philippi to his 12 guys, and the mission of our church, which aligns with the mission of Christ Church in terms of inviting every generation to experience the love and the grace of Jesus, is far too critical for us to ever close our doors. And I just believe what we do and why we do it as a church is just so important. And only together can we continue to accomplish this mission that continues to live on, and we just see incredible things happening already, and we want to continue to see incredible things happen in 2019. Now, here's the good news, and you're like, we need some good news. Okay, here's the good news. This is not the first time in the history of the church. It's not the first time for the people of God for thousands of years to find themselves in a position where they are on the outside looking in, or where they find themselves going, wait a second, we're not in charge anymore. In fact, in most places in the world, that's the case. Throughout most of history, that's been the case. When Christianity began to spread throughout the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago, 1,800 years ago, there were no laws protecting Christians' right to worship. In fact, there were laws on the books that persecuted Christians for worshiping their God. It's a unique moment for the American church to say, wait a second, we're not in charge anymore. We're kind of on the outside looking in. Something has changed. The fabric of the spiritual landscape around us has changed, but it's not a new moment for the church. And so I want to take us back in time. We're going to look at a verse in Psalms, and then we're going to look at a verse in the book of Jeremiah. In fact, if you have a Bible, you can turn with Jeremiah together. If you don't have a Bible, that's okay. We place these verses on the screen, Jeremiah chapter 29. We're going to look at a familiar passage of Scripture. And this is about 2,700 years ago, just to give you some context. About 2,700 years ago, in Jerusalem, for the Israelites, life is great. They're in charge. They have a temple, which is a symbol of their worship. They literally believe God dwelled in the temple that stood in the middle of the city of Jerusalem. There was a wall around the city, which stood for their safety. It had been there for generations upon generations. The economy was thriving. Things were great. When they looked around, there was a king. I mean, everything just was great in Jerusalem. But as it always does, everything changed. And the Babylonians come along. And the Babylonians were the world's superpower. And the Babylonians decided they wanted to capture and kidnap the Israelites, the people who lived in Jerusalem. And so they conquered them. They knocked down the wall. It took a while. They knocked down the wall. They knocked down the temple. And now the very symbol of their safety and the very symbol of their faith was gone. And the Babylonians, they upped their game a little bit, and they captured and they kidnapped the Israelites, or the Jewish people, and they brought them back to Babylon. And now the Israelites, the people of God, are going to find themselves disoriented. They're going to find themselves in a position where they go, wait a second, life used to make sense the way that it was, but it doesn't make sense here in Babylon. In Babylon, when they get there, Babylon does not worship their God. In Israel, does not worship Yahweh. In Babylon, you could say it a lot of different ways, but in Babylon, they essentially worship three things: money, sex, and power. Money, sex, and power. Use your imagination together this morning. But can you fathom a culture where people bow down, where people crave above anything else money, sex, and power? And here the Israelites are, the Jewish people, disoriented, not quite sure how to raise kids in this new environment, trying to figure out, what do? We just want things to go back to the way that they were. You even see stories in the Psalms. You see Psalms that are written. Some of these Psalms that maybe you love to read were written while the Hebrew people were in captivity. It goes on for 70 years in Babylon. This is one of the Psalms. Psalms chapter 137, verse 1 says this: by the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. When we remembered Jerusalem, we would sit by the rivers of Babylon and weep, remembering the good old days. How many of us, if you're honest, as I was talking a few moments ago, or as you get older, I certainly do this, you find yourself in moments going, I just miss the way things were. We do this about all kinds of things, whether it's technology, whether it's raising kids. I miss a simpler time. We do this in all different facets of life. A couple of weeks ago, my brother and I, we were watching my son Dane. He was playing one of those Nintendo classics, where it's like the 80s vintage system that has the games on it that we played when we were kids. And we were watching him play this, and my brother and I were talking. We were going, do you remember when video games were just simpler? Wasn't that great? When the most violence you had to worry about in a video game was like Mario killing a turtle. I mean, that was like as violent as it got. And now, some of you as parents, oh my goodness, you're trying to figure out what Fortnite is, and what are all the secret codes to Grand Theft Auto that your son's hiding from you and and it's just complicated. And there's something in you, just like there's something in me that goes, I just wish we could go back to the way that things were. That impulse is as old as Babylon itself. And the good news is God shows up to a prophet named Jeremiah and speaks to the prophet and speaks through the prophet to the people of God. And he sends a surprising message before they're dragged off to Babylon. And he says, when you get there, this is what I want you to do. And I'm sure even Jeremiah, when he heard this, he was shocked about what God was asking them to do. And I think this is as applicable in 2019 when Christians, when the people of God find themselves in situations and in circumstances going, this is unfamiliar territory. We don't know how to raise kids in this kind of a culture. It seems like our parents or their parents had it a lot simpler and a lot easier. If you find yourself in those moments, if you find yourself in those circumstances, this message through the prophet Jeremiah that was applicable 2,700 years ago is just as applicable today. This is what God says through Jeremiah, verse 4 of Jeremiah chapter 29. The verses are on the screens. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. I want you, verse 5, while you're in Babylon, to build houses and settle down. I want you to plant gardens and eat what they produce. To which the people, when they would hear this, they go, you want us to eat crops from the soil of Babylon? Are you kidding me? I want you to engage with the Babylonians. Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, hey, I want you to lock the doors and create holy huddles and just kind of hope that one day it all kind of changes and you go back to Jerusalem. That's not a bad impulse and a bad instinct. But while you're there, I want you to get your hands dirty. I want you to engage with the land that I've called you to. I want you to engage with these people that don't even make sense to you. I want you to live there, plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, and this is incredible, and your jaw would be on the floor when you heard this. Also, verse 7, seek the peace and the prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Seek the peace and the prosperity of Babylon. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. If it prospers, you too will prosper. And then he says this in verse 11. This is a famous verse. Some of us, you have this on a sticky note somewhere on your bathroom mirror. You've prayed this verse before, or maybe it's written in the front of your Bible. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. As I think about our church, as I pray for our church, I have the exact same prayer. And I think there is a principle and there is a promise that is woven into this 2,700-year-old prophecy. If you and I as people, if we look around our city and we pray for it, if we look around North County, San Diego, and we seek the peace and the prosperity of our city, if we engage with our city, if we leverage what God has given us, the resources, the talents, the time, the energy that he has given us to make a difference and help our city flourish, I just believe there's a principle here. I think God said, hey, if you leverage what you have to help others around you flourish, I will leverage what I have as God to help you flourish. If you leverage what you have to help give somebody who doesn't have a hope in a future around you a hope in a future, I will leverage what I have as God to help give you a hope and a future. If you leverage what you've been given to lift somebody up who's broken and hurting, I will leverage what I have as God to lift you up when you are broken and when you are hurting. I want to give you a hope and a future. He says, seek the peace and the prosperity of the city. Engage with the city. Don't ignore the people. Don't just lock the doors and kind of, say, hey, we want things to get better. No, I want you to engage with He essentially says this, hey, Hebrew people, hey, Jewish people, I want you when you're in Babylon to be good neighbors. He essentially says, hey, when you get to Babylon, here's what I want you to do. I want you to find a park and I want you to spread some mulch there. He essentially says, hey, in a culture that is bent on money, sex, and power, there are going to be females that feel stripped of their identity, stripped of their purpose. They're going to only feel like they're objects of sexual gratification for men. They're going to feel like they're completely worthless. I want you to work to restore, reclaim, help them find their footing again as human beings, give them their dignity back. There's going to be kids in the cities, in a world bent on money, sex, and power that don't have food to eat. I want you to work tirelessly to bring food. Help them find a hope and a future. Help give them peace. Help give them a sense of prosperity. And I will leverage what I have as God to give you peace and prosperity. And so for 70 years they did, and for 70 years God did. And I think there is something in there for the church, not just our church, but the church, but for us locally here to say, if we continue as a church to do what we did in 2018, to be good neighbors to our city, to help survivors of human trafficking, to help feed hungry kids, to continue to use the resources that we have to give people outside of these walls a hope and a future, God will continue to lean into our community and giving us a hope and a future and helping us flourish as well. And that's my prayer for 2019. That's my prayer for each and every one of us as a church, to be involved and a part of that. Because if you do, so will God. You go, well, how in the world do I do that? I got to go to work tomorrow, and it's raising kids and life. It's really three simple things as a church. And you've heard us say this. If you hung out with us last year, you hear us say this a lot around here. It's a door, it's a table, and it's a garden. And my prayer for you, my wish for you in 2019 is that if you have not engaged with these three core values of our church, is that you'd find a way to be a door, you'd find a way to a table, and you'd find a way to the garden. This is how we love our city. This is how we take care of each other in the circumstances in the world that we find ourselves in. The door is simply this. We just believe as a church that Jesus is for everyone. For all people. You saw those signs on your way into church. We just believe Jesus is for everyone. And I want you to have the opportunity and the experience in 2019 to be a door to somebody who's far away from God. You have a friend, you have a coworker, you have a family member who is currently wandering in Babylon, probably bowing at an altar of money, sex, and power. And if you just commit this year to pray for them, here's what I want for you. I want you to experience a growth in your faith, and a growth that only comes when God uses you as a conduit to bring about change in somebody else. Nothing will benefit your faith like being a door to somebody and allowing them. And it's not because, you sat down and explained the Trinity, or you sat down and answered all their questions about where dinosaurs were on the ark. And, it's not because you know all the answers, but you're just praying for them. And then maybe one day an opportunity comes up for you to invite them to our church. And it will grow your faith. It will impact your faith. And one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this is because this month, actually almost to the day, marks the 20th anniversary that I started going to church, January of 1999. And the reason I started going to church, really going back to church since I was a kid, the reason I started going to church in January of 1999 was not because I kept driving by the building going, well, it would be fun if I just showed up there one day. The reason I started going to church in January of 1999 is because a guy named Todd had been praying for me for a long time, and he finally worked up the courage to call me one day and invite me to church. And so as an 18-year-old kid, as a high school senior, I stumbled into the back of a church, and it impacted me in ways that are unspeakable. But you know who else it impacted when I asked him later? It was Todd. He had prayed and prayed and prayed, and it grew his faith in a way that Bible study doesn't do. When you get to be a conduit for someone else to experience Jesus, and if we become inviters, if we become doors to people in our city outside the walls of this church, I don't want this because I want our church to grow. I want this because I want your faith to grow in 2019. And even if you don't know all the answers and you don't know all the words to the songs, Nothing will grow your faith like being used by God to impact somebody else and impacting someone in this city. There's another thing that we talk about a lot. It's the table. And we're going to be talking about this a lot. We want everyone to have a seat at the table. If you have not found a life group or small group here, we just encourage you to find a life group and a small group. It's going to be your church. Those are going to be your people. They're going to take care of you. You're going to take care of them. There's something powerful about showing up for people who are just like you, trying to figure out how to manage life in Babylon, how to raise kids in Babylon, how to continue to live in a culture that does not share or does not have your values. And we just want that. We're going to launch this in February of this month, so you got about a month to argue with God about it, okay? But we just want everyone to find a place at the table. If you're a female, I can't encourage you enough to come to IF Gathering. It's this women's conference that Kristen and Pam were talking about a few moments ago. If you're a female, you need to be here February 8th and 9th. I'll watch all of your kids, okay? Just me, all right? I promise. I just want you here. I just want you here. And I want you here not because of what you're going to learn, that's part of it. I want you here because of what you are going to see. Other business professionals like you are trying to find their footing in Babylon. Other moms who are just like you, who are trying to figure out how to raise kids in a world where it's often confusing and difficult. And what's going to be powerful isn't what you're going to learn. That's a part of it. It's what you're going to see. There's a lot of people just like you. The reason Roseanne and I prioritize our Wednesday night small group is not because we show up and go, oh, we're going to learn so much tonight. I mean, that's part of it. Why we prioritize our small group on Wednesday night is because of who we're going to see. And we're going to be sitting at a table with people and parents who are also trying to find their footing in Babylon. And you need that, and I need that in 2019. It's the garden. Find a place to serve in the garden. You hear us talk all the time about alabaster jar and impacting survivors of human trafficking. You hear us talk about Unite, feeding hungry kids. That's going to continue in 2019 to be the tip of the spear. And we're going to continue to do everything that we can as a church to leverage everything that we can to help people in our city who are hurting and don't have a hope in a future to have a hope in a future. And we just lean into that promise that as we do, God increases our hope. God increases our future. And I just want you to not miss it. I want you to play a part. It might be inside the walls of the church where you sign up to pass out bulletins for the first time, or you sign up to flip burgers at a student ministry event for the first time. I just want you to find a way to get your hands dirty in serving and experiencing the joy that comes when you help take care of somebody else and giving them a hope and a future. Because the mission of our church to invite every generation to experience the love and the grace of Jesus is so, so critical. And we celebrate all that God did in 2018, and we anticipate together all that he's going to do in 2019. Let's pray together. God, I love this place. While I was away on vacation, I had to have rules about not talking about church so much because I love this place. And as DJ comes to lead us, reflect on this song, I thank you that nothing was wasted in 2018. No dollar was wasted, no hour served was wasted, no mulch was wasted. And as we look ahead to this new year, God, it would be easy to look outside the walls and say, that's secular, this is sacred, but God, all of it's sacred to you. And you care about people outside the walls just as much as you care about people inside these walls. And would you leverage us like a spear? Would you use us to impact this city in ways that we could only imagine? And we thank you for all that you're going to do. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray, and all of God's children said,